Hi there. Today we have such an interesting guest for you. It is a fascinating conversation. We are talking with Randall Alifano about listening. And you think, come on, listening. How can you talk for an hour about listening? It's something that we all do naturally. We're born with ears, we know how to listen. Things just somehow happen in our brains, and we know how to listen. But we go deep into the meaning of listening, active listening, how really listening is the key to overcoming loneliness, and how we can improve our lives, our well-being, to find more fulfillment and connect with each other better, how we can become better therapists, coaches, parents, human beings by learning how to listen with intention, with attention, and how to be more vulnerable, how to be more raw, to understand that to truly listen, we do need to put our ego aside and be more curious. So, without any further ado, let's go into our conversation with Randall and let's talk about listening.
So before we carry on with our wonderful conversation, we just want to remind you about our new Patreon account. It's Into Your Life podcast. And this is a place where we share those gold nuggets that we've got from our guests, and a place where we are here to support you, to help you in any way that we can. And we will start to be bringing in conversations with previous guests, but also conversations between Lenka and myself. So this is a community that we would love for you to be part of, because by you being part of this community, you make it a better place to be. So come and check us out on Patreon at Into Your Life.
Welcome. Today we have another wonderful guest. I would like to welcome our guest, Randall Alifano. Hello, Randall. How are you doing?
Hi, you guys. I'm doing quite well. How are you doing?
All good. Thank you so much for being here with us. We're excited to have a conversation. But to start, we need to know a bit about you. So would you mind telling us and our listeners who you are, a bit of your story, maybe how you ended up where you are right now, and we will take it from there.
Sure. I can give you the broad stroke history's lesson. Um, Raised in a family where I felt a bit alien because everyone talked over everybody else. No one really listened. And I was always curious because I could feel how alone they all were, but nobody was listening to have a real honest connection. So rather early on, I became a listener. And then I realized that was nice with psychology. So I studied psychology. And I've been in private practice for 40 years listening to people. And after all that listening, I realized more and more what gets in the way of real listening. And complementarily, what we need to drop into curiosity, innocence, to really be receptive in listening, not just as a technique, like an empathic technique, but to really be penetrated by what the person was sharing, both in their words and underneath their narrative. So you really have a felt experience of. And what I noticed with clients in particular was the moments I wasn't listening, they could tell. They would maybe just move back a millimeter, but you could tell, they could feel it, even if they didn't have language for it. So I became rather devoted to listening practice, the art of listening. How do I do that? And that's where the book came from.
And that's interesting that you say listening. How do I do that? Because maybe our listeners will think, well, listening, we all kind of know how to do it unless we have any hearing disability. We all know how to listen. We have ears, we can listen. That's a natural thing that we as human beings are born with. We are born and we know how to listen. And yet, I can imagine that it's not as simple as that, as just being able to hear what's coming in and being able to translate the mechanical waves into sounds and make sense of them in our brain and understand, the language, the noise, the sounds that we're seeing and interpret them somehow. But there's definitely so much more to it. And I will just say one thing that I got from my years of being on this planet and working in marketing, where we do occasionally talk about listening. Occasionally in sales and marketing, you will touch on the topic of listening. And for me, I think the biggest lesson was understanding the difference between listen to respond and
Yes.
listen to understand. And I would love for
Good.
you to, if we can maybe start in this way, to explain our listeners more about, what is listening actually, what different ways of listening we have, and why is it really so impactful to know how to truly listen?
Yeah, that's a lot. We could talk about that all day long. And I agree with you. I think we're so programmed to listen to respond. So somebody might say something about their mother, and I could easily go to, oh yeah, my mother, blah, 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 blah. And then my curiosity about them and what they were just starting to dive into gets mulled over. So I do prefer the real connection in the listening. And I think where we therapy types get confused is we're taught that we're healers. And if we're healers, it means the client needs to be healed, meaning they're sick, there's something wrong. Even that's a filter to listening. Because if I'm in my head trying to figure out how to heal, those ears you were just talking about, they get a little clogged. And a simple analogy is we look at the sun and someone says, what color is the sun? You look up and go, well, it's yellow. But of course, it's white. It comes through the filter of our atmosphere. But from this side, of course, it's yellow. Why are you even asking? And to me, it's the same with listening. It's easy to think, oh, I understand what they're saying because I have this experience or that experience. But to really drop in and bring curiosity and ask questions like you were saying, to really understand from the inside out, for me, that's not only transformative for the speaker, it's transformative for the listener because now our perspective opens wider and wider and wider.
That's so true. I think as kids, we obviously are taught how to listen to respond at school. That's the system, how the school system often is. Teachers telling something, we're trying
Right.
to absorb what they're saying, and then we're getting questions of give me answer to this and this, and then we are prepared. We have to have a quick answer. If we're not quick with answers, then the teachers will think that we're slow, we're stupid, we're not paying attention, we're not listening. And it could be so many little obstacles that through the society systems that we have, that we are really getting further and further away from true, genuine, deep listening. There are lots of things that are coming into my mind that could stop us from really listen. Even when you brought in, working with people, I know that, for example, coaches, it's an interesting role where, yes, they are listening, but they also often try to keep notes. And for me, that's a tricky situation where you're listening and yet you're trying to take me on a journey and you're trying to keep notes so then you can reflect back to me.
Exactly that. So that's what it gets tricky and subtle because even good intentions can become filters that inhibit listening. So it's I mean, where I go with it is the biggest challenge, whether you're a coach or a therapist or a parent or a partner, how to hold the unknown for a little longer than we're used to. How to presume with humility, I really don't know what they're saying yet because I don't feel it. So let me ask more questions until I feel it. Then I can say, so is this what you mean? Is that? And then there's real connection. And it's separate from I have to heal you or I have to find your diagnosis and then treat the diagnosis. It's a very different way to sit with someone.
And from what I'm kind of hearing from there is we also need to learn how to put our ego aside. And
Mm.
it's interesting that, yes, we're talking about profession specifically, or, roles where we are in the role of healing, of helping, of making impact on someone else. And there could be, even in this kind of a line of work, it could be obviously our ego of like, we want to help, we want to heal, we want to be
Yes.
the one to make the impact and help people achieve a transformation. And yet, from what I'm getting from you, to really be able to truly listen with open mind, open heart, open soul, to welcome whatever we are supposed to receive from the other person without any judgment, without any limits, without us blocking the listening, that there is a very difficult step of putting aside our ego.
I think you're absolutely right. And what already I want to reflect something. I have a sense you live it. Just the way you are present and ask questions, you're deepening the conversation instead of working from egoic kind of place. So it opens me up. I think, oh, I'm safe. I can say anything. We can really get into it together. So yeah, I think humility is a big piece of this and that's the problem when we're trained as psychologists. Now we know, we're the ones who know, and we're going to teach you or educate you or guide you. And all of that has truth to it. But if that's our main perspective, instead of, wait, so you said that one thing, what was that about? Where there's real, genuine desire to get to know each other. Yeah, then it goes through the ego. And that's probably the biggest filter we have.
So we touched on then the ego, the filters. Are there any other obstacles to listening that you often come across that maybe we haven't touched on? I'm sure there will be plenty, but before we get into any possible, solutions or understanding how to listen better, I would love to explore a bit more about what can then be holding us from truly listening deeply and meaningfully.
That's a great question. Everything from um, internalized racism, homophobia, whatever, that will filter listening. Like I mentioned earlier, even good intentions. Oh, they're depressed. I want to help their depression. It's a good intention, and let's hold that. But it can also be a filter and get in the way of listening. More subtle things like I'm a little insecure. So I need to hear from the speaker that I'm doing a good job. That blocks listening. Or I'm all that. I'm the doctor. It gets in the way of listening. So to me, it's a little bit like a meditation practice. You stay with it, and every moment you learn more and more about how I'm getting in the way of, in meditation, quiet mind, in listening, quiet mind. And like I've said, and probably will say many more times, real curiosity. How do you do it? How do you survive that trauma with your dad? I'm enthralled with how courageous and resourceful we are, even as children, to develop protections to survive whatever's going on with mom, dad, older siblings, whatever. But then those protections could later on get in the way of real listening and humility. So it's a good one.
And kind of as I'm listening, I'm really kind of getting the sense of, you know, obviously the importance of listening and importance of curiosity in there. And it also makes me really feel that the true, obviously genuine, meaningful, impactful listening kind of is a very vulnerable and a raw experience, which obviously makes sense because, listening in the raw is the whole concept that you brought up into the world. So I would love to explore, why for you it was the concept of listening in a raw. What does it mean to you, and how do you come up with it? And tell us a bit more about that, please.
Again, that's a great question. I love that question. Um, One way to put it is when I first started out, a psychiatrist that I knew referred someone to me who said she needed supportive counseling. He was completely incorrect. She had DID, multiple personality. She had horrible, horrible abuse as a child, things that would horrify Stephen King, things I knew nothing about and I wasn't prepared for. And when she felt safe with me because I was listening and not diagnosing, she started opening up about the horrors that she went through as a child. And I had no idea what to do. This was completely beyond my pay grade as a beginning therapist. But I knew how to listen. So I kept on asking questions until I could feel the horror that she was trying to communicate. And then there was this connection where she would just went from memory to memory to memory, and all the various personalities came together and came like a council, and she just stopped suffering. I mean, it took years. Don't get me wrong. This was hard work. But she taught me it wasn't what I know. She taught me it was what I was willing to not know and be comfortable in it and ask questions about what it was like for her. And then she would give me feedback. She would let me know, I've never been listened to quite like that. And that makes me think of, and then we're following another trajectory. So she was very instrumental in teaching me hold all the things I've learned in graduate school. And then when I'm sitting with someone, let them go and just sit here and be curious with them. The other thing I can say is since I was a young child, I've always been very, very conscious of how alone I felt with people. That was my hurt. And so I became really interested in what is this aloneness I feel? I'm surrounded by people, I'm popular, I like people, they like me. But down deep, there was this aloneness. And like I said earlier, it kept on bringing me back to no one's really, really listening to each other. We're not making the kind of contact where that aloneness now becomes us. So it became kind of an integration of psychology and spirituality. And what I say about those two, if I can say one more thing, is from high school, I thought, no, these things have to be brought together. And my professors were saying, you don't understand philosophy. They cannot be brought together. But I thought psychology without spirituality loses its depth and breadth. Spirituality without psychology loses the specificity with how psychology can understand trauma and personality and defenses and such. So they had to be brought together. So if we're going to listen, it has to be a spiritual practice, right?
And I think you're touching on such an important topic in today's super connected world, and it is loneliness, and that is the fact that we communicate more than ever before on multiple devices, multiple streams. All day long, we communicate with others, with the whole world, with multiple people. And yet, more people now than ever before feel lonely, feel disconnected, feel
Yes.
not heard, because
Yes.
there's so much overwhelm in our minds, there's so much communication. And yes, there is a lot of me in there,
Yes.
not enough. There's so much consumption and so much of us wanting to put out in the world and share with the world that really creating this pocket of intentional listening, I think, is the thing we are missing. It's the one where we really focus on the one person that is in front of us without worrying about the millions of things around. And I totally get that this is very hard to then achieve without the spirituality in there. Because if we don't bring something bigger than us, then how do we do that?
Again, an excellent point. I think you're absolutely right. And I recognize I'm a bit of a dinosaur. So when I talk about social media, I may really exemplify that. But yeah, that's what I get through this big social media push now is it's all about expressing, dumping, throwing things out, and not a lot of listening and real connecting. And it, frankly, kind of scares me a little because that's what I see exactly what you just mentioned. There's a lot of aloneness out there and it's growing. We're not coming together.
I really love listening to you, and I hope that I'm hearing what is being said. No pressure there at all. But this is something that I am very passionate about, learning to understand about listening. Because as Lenka said, we have ears, we can hear. And one of the things that got me started on listening is I was a Toastmaster with Toastmasters International, which is a public speaking
Yes.
organization. But part of that is listening to other people's speeches and giving feedback. And it was always very much you've got one mouth, two ears. So you talk half the amount of time that you listen. And this is
Oh, I love that.
and this is what got me starting to think about listening, because before that I listen and that was it, but I never really understood what listening was about. And one of the things, and I know you guys briefly touched on it, but it's this anticipation when, and I often feel it as when I'm speaking, I can almost feel the other person anticipating what they want to say. And I have intentionally stopped halfway through a sentence to see what happens. And they off on answering God knows what they're answering because I haven't finished my question. And it's something, there's this hurry to answer. There's this hurry to almost get a conversation over and done with, or to get your thought, your idea out there.
Yes. And I love, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, carry on.
I love how you put it, that anticipation, you as the speaker can feel it. So you're sensitive, you're listening while you're sharing. And you can hear they're not quite here. They're up here about to jump in. And then what I notice are sensitive people, and I think I can throw us all into that category. We pick it up like that. And then we step back. And then the connection, it's a bit separate. We're not quite as that.
It's something that I've noticed. So either I've become more aware of it, or it is increasing, is this, and maybe it has something to do with this overconsumption of content, you know, as we were, as you guys mentioned, you know, with social media, and you can just get content 24/7 just thrown at you. And whether that's part of it, or we're in such a hurry now that don't bother finishing a sentence. I don't have time. I will answer whatever I think you are asking, because quite often, if you're not listening and you have that anticipation, you don't necessarily have the right answer because you've assumed something that you're not even asking.
Exactly that. That presumption, I think, is a key, a major filter. I think I know what's going on, so I jump in instead of asking a question, even to see if my presumption is on the right track or not. And it's interesting, you were talking earlier about how we're trained. In the book, I talk about it here in the States, there are debate clubs, but there are no listening clubs. And I quipped that, wouldn't it be great if your child comes home and says, Papa, I got an A in listening today. I would be so proud. But they don't teach that. They teach how to represent, how to talk. So yeah, I think you're right. I think we're way off balance. And now with social media, even more so.
I see it a lot, is groups of friends in a restaurant or in a coffee shop, or, you know, parents picking up their kids from school, walking back. Very often there's one person talking and everybody else are on their phones. So you know that there's no listening going on, because first of all, multitasking doesn't exist. You're snapping your brain from one to another. So how can you be listening if you are looking at your mobile phone, if you listening to something while somebody else is talking or watching something? And you know, I've been talking to people while they're watching something, and I say, well, are you actually listening to me? Yeah, it's on mute, so I can hear you. No, you can't hear me because you're actually looking at something else. So the I guess there's a difference between hearing and listening. They most probably don't mean the same thing, because I can hear you if you're making a noise, but I actually have to listen in order to hear what you are saying, or to be curious about where you are taking me on your journey. Does that make sense? Have I sort of got it right?
Oh my God, you're making perfect sense. And I want to, if I may, throw the question back at you. How do you, I don't know, become aware of, work that line between I'm hearing you, but now I want to listen? What's the transition from hearing to listening for you guys?
Wow, that's I think for me, it's the attention. Is I can hear, you know, if my husband's talking to me or people are talking to me, I can hear them. But if I'm actually listening, it's giving all of my attention to listen to what they're saying. So quite often, yes, I'm on my phone and my husband talks to me, and then he says, did you just hear what I said? It's like, no, repeat that. I didn't hear a word you said. And it's become a laughing joke in our household. So it's normally just the prattle, I guess. But if I really wanted to listen to somebody, is get rid of all the distractions and focus, or give my attention to them, and try to, it doesn't always work, but try to slow down the brain so that I'm not trying to anticipate an answer of what I can share with them or give to them. That's sort of something that I'm working on, and that's just me. I don't know. Lenka, I'm sure, has something different because we are total opposites.
Oh, really? Okay. Your turn.
I don't think we're that different, and definitely agree with what Natalie was saying. For me, it's the intention, it's the intent to want to have a meaningful conversation with someone, wanting to really listen and show people that I'm listening, I'm paying attention, I'm giving them my all. And I had a couple of wonderful experiences that really drill down the importance of this uninterrupted, intentional, intense, because this kind of listening feels very intense. And I totally
Yes.
understand that we don't want to always do it, and some people never want to do it, and we distract ourselves with so much. Because I had a couple experiences with be it a women's circle, be it a networking, where through a bit of very gentle guidance and coaching, we either had someone holding a speaking stick and only the person holding the stick could speak, and the rest of the people, unless you were holding a stick, you were not speaking, which created a very different dynamic in the room because you knew that you're not going to talk for a really long time. Yes, you will have a moment to talk and you can request the stick, but you will spend more time listening than speaking, which is interesting balance. Or take it even to an extreme of doing it one-on-one, where one person has been instructed to speak for about 3 to 5 minutes about themselves, and the other person could not have said a word, just taking it in and listening. And it's intimidating, I think, on both ends in these scenarios where you have to spend 3 minutes, 5 minutes talking about yourself. But the other person cannot say anything. But then after we experience it from both ends and we started discussing this experience, we were like, oh my God, immediately we were so connected with this person. We were like, we spoke for 5 minutes, but we're best friends. We know each other. It
Yes.
just created such a, as you said, wonderful sense of curiosity because we then wanted to talk more, wanted to go into deeper ends. So for me, it's the intention of, I want to really hear you. I want to understand you. I want to create the space for you. And yeah, as Natalie said, sometimes even in our household, it just doesn't happen. Like I'm on my phone doing something, but I'm really trying hard when I notice that my partner's saying something. I pause the TV, I turn to him, I'm like, now please talk, tell me what you want. Or when I'm on my phone, I really need to finish something and he's talking, I'm like, please, can we have a second timeout? Could you please stop for 2 minutes? I will finish this and I will have your full attention. Because I know that otherwise my brain just starts jumping from one end to the other. And just this gets me thinking also about the increase of ADHD because we
Yes.
all multitask more and more and more. And there is a
Yes.
lot more of the pressure. So yeah, that would be my answer. Very long answer, but hopefully it makes sense.
Well, if I may, you both get an A. Yay! And I love what you just said about two elements. One is intention. Do I really want to join with this person and listen? And the other is the assumptions we make, how to get out of the way of those assumptions and feel, and this is the key word, vulnerability. And I love that you brought it in because whether we're parents talking to children or teachers talking to students or therapy types talking to clients, that they're the vulnerable ones and we're the ones holding space. Now, it's true, we are holding space, but if we're not feeling vulnerable through curiosity, just like you guys are so beautifully and sensitively putting it, like that, they're not really there. And if I may, you were talking about, your partners and such. If I can tell a story about another client I saw again when I was just starting out, again, she taught me so much. She came in and she was silent for a long time. And I was taught, hold space, don't interrupt, just, and then it was going on and I started to feel anxious. I thought, well, maybe my holding space is making her feel more alone. And I started to get confused. So I said, can you tell me how you're feeling? And she stood looking down. She said, there's nothing to live for. There's nothing to die for, just darkness. And I thought, wow, so I did an empathic technique. I said something to the effect of, wow, it sounds really dark in there, really sad. And she looked up to me and she said, you don't get it. There's nothing to live for. And she looked back down again. So I thought, okay, wait, I'm not diving deep enough into it. So I said, oh, I really feel how lost you feel in there. And I thought I was really feeling it, presumption. So I said that. And she looked up to me. And this time, with a little bit of irritation, she said, you're not listening. And she looked back down. And I could feel a little reaction in me, like, well, I'm doing the best I can. Come on, kind of a feeling. And then a little voice said, she's right. You're not really dropping in. You're not really listening. So I dropped in, and it was dropping into my body, like starting to meditate. And suddenly I was in the Arctic, and it was night, and it was freezing cold, and there was nothing to see, nothing to hear. It was just emptiness. And I was so overwhelmed. Talk about vulnerability. I was so overwhelmed by this sudden experience in me that I said to her, in a completely different tone, I just said, "Oh, I see." And she looked up to me and made eye contact, and we were quiet for a minute. And she went, "Thank you." And then the whole work shifted direction. We were on a completely different path than we had been on for several months of our talking together. And she pushed me. If she had given pulled back that millimeter, went, okay, blah, 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 and then we did the blah, blah, blah talking, no good work would have been done. But she pushed me to go deeper into myself, and it was such a gift.
I love that story. It's just amazing how, like you said, we assume that we understand or can feel what somebody's feeling, but we don't, because everybody's on their own path. And I love how she pushed you to get an idea of what it was that she wanted. Well, I guess you finally listened in a
Yes.
really random way. I don't think just falling into meditation is something that, you know, we do in a coffee shop or anything.
Correct.
But one thing I wanted to, and this is coming from me, it's something I've noticed, and it will be interesting to see if I'm on the right track or I'm just totally losing the plot. And I'm okay with losing the plot, just so you know. But I have noticed there's a lot of noise now. I don't know whether it's because I'm getting older or there is more noise, but you go out with friends to a coffee shop or a restaurant, and growing up and as a young adult, yes, there was always the noise, but there was more, the chatter, the background noise. So there was people talking, dishes clattering, and that's like live noise for me. But I have noticed over the last couple of years, it's almost like silence is a bad thing. So you go into any coffee shop, even ones who say, we embrace the quiet, but there's a radio blaring or there's music. And the louder conversation gets, I've noticed the volume of the background music goes up. And then, of course, conversation gets louder. And I've been in a coffee shop, drinking coffee, almost with disco loud music in the background. And I'm like,
Sure.
I've got to leave. I've got to get out of here. And this is not conducive to listening because, well, for me, I'm so distracted by this music going on or adverts playing or something that I find it really difficult to actually listen to what the person that I'm with is saying. I don't mind live background noise, the background noise of people chatting or the dishes drop or the clatter. I find that quite calming and quite soothing because it's almost like listening to kids playing outdoors in the summer. It's just a nice, it's it's a background noise that doesn't have a beat to it in a way. But when you go and you intentionally go to have a conversation with somebody, whether it's a meal or coffee or you're just meeting in a hotel lobby, there's this constant music. So I don't know if that's just me getting older and more cranky, or is this something that you are noticing as well, that this idea that there's the silence? Because if you're not having a conversation and you're just sitting quietly, there's no silence. So is that something that is noticeable? Is this something that you've
Like,
realized, seen, or?
I can give you my presumption. And that is you're right on both accounts. I think it is increasingly noisy. And my prayer would be that as we get older, we become more sensitive to the noise, to the cacophony. And we can feel it doesn't quite feel right. I want more quiet within which I can hear what's going on, genuinely hear what's going on. And, speaking for myself, it bugs me more and more as I get older when there's a cacophony of noise, usually people talking over each other. And I can feel ever more presently, I don't like this. I would rather just be in a conversation that's can follow its natural course, which usually has depth to it and vulnerability, like you said earlier. So I'm kind of bugged by the same thing.
And I think we can take this even a bit deeper. And if we remove other people and look at the silence, how uncomfortable silence makes us individually when we're alone. Because I've noticed that, people cannot be silent anymore. They cannot have no distraction, no phone, no music, no podcast, no book, no journal, nothing. Just sit and be and observe. And it doesn't need to be like complete silence. There could be nature noises. There could be, the household noises, but meaning as we look into the spiritual, more of the just silencing of the mind, because the outside noise and the noise of our life is creating so much discomfort in our ability to just be silent, not touch anything, not play with anything, not write anything, not read anything. I know myself when I'm commuting for 2, 3 hours and I forget my headphones initially and I don't have a book, the discomfort, the anxiety, the almost rage of like, what am I going to do with myself for 2 hours of not being able to occupy this silence? And then realizing that it's a beautiful thing, this silence, but it's making so many people so uncomfortable. So is this something that you also come across in your practice with yourself, with your clients? It's just something that, you could maybe help us shine light and give us some words of wisdoms to feel more comfortable in this silence.
Well, I'll give you words. I'm not sure there's going to be much wisdom to them. But what you're reminding me of, and you said it, anxiety. In the book, I spend quite a bit of time talking about anxiety and its correlates because oftentimes, like you were saying, Natalie, we jump in too early. Oftentimes, we have these thoughts, and there's a teeny bit of anxiety or a lot of anxiety, and we want to get it out. And so I talk in the book about anxiety is one of the main filters, and we don't register it because it can just be somatic, and we're just reacting. But then the second problem is if we notice, oh, I'm anxious, I'm supposed to get rid of anxiety. That's also going to trip us up, as opposed to I need to listen to the anxiety. What did they just say that I started to feel this little tremor in me, if you will? So how am I listening to you and listening to me at the same time? So I can notice, oh, I can feel the little contraction of anxiety. And I can just say, oh, yeah, that's, they said that, and it tweaked that little nerve in me, maybe. Okay, I got it. Now, tell me more about that thing, so that it doesn't pull me out of the conversation, even if I get, so that I don't get lost. And I've got to get rid of the anxiety so I can listen. It's no, we're all invited. And I can hold the anxiety instead of trying to get rid of it and fix it. If we get trapped in that, forget about really listening, especially in the raw, because like you said earlier, what I tried to get through the title was, if you're going to really listen, you're going to feel vulnerable. That means you're going to be in the unknown for a bit. How do we do that? How do we just sit with a twinge of anxiety while we know we don't really know exactly what they're saying yet? So let's go after it. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it answers the question. As you said, they're words and they will mean something else to different people. But what it really made me genuinely feel is the power of our body in listening. Again, when we think of listening, we think of ears. Natalie said we have two ears, we should listen more than we talk. But I don't think we only listen through our ears. We obviously listen through our eyes. We look at body language and all the things. And there is such a different dynamic if we would close our eyes and try to have this conversation without looking at each other at cameras and looking at stuff. And we would remove some of the senses. And if we go beyond the senses, obviously we know that we get lots of information through our, touch and smell and taste, but also so much when we start talking about anxiety that our body will tell us. The listening through, what our gut is telling us, what our heart is telling us, what our palms are telling us, what our inner landscape is telling us on top of all that we're hearing. And that is another complicated layer of learning how not only to listen with the ears, but also to listen with the rest of our body.
Oh my God, I love talking to you guys. You're so in it. You so get it. Yes, there's a chapter in the book called Listening from the Heart. And what I try to say is, I'm not talking about the organ. I'm talking about it the way poets talk about the heart, the whole body. Like you said, even your palms are telling you something. Listen, don't try to fix it. Oh no, my palms are, oh, I should not have that. No, no, no. Let it drop you into even a deeper curiosity about something's going on in the field, that my belly is tight or my chest suddenly expanded or whatever it is. There's so much information if we sit and are quiet, have humility, and really listen. And it creates real intimate contact. The aloneness ebbs. It just does.
One question I'd like to ask is, Lenka and I are, well, we class ourselves as introverts. Now, we don't always like to put labels on things, but I do like the knowledge that I'm quite an introvert. I've always liked to be on my own. I find people quite hard work sometimes, and Lenka is more of a traveling type introvert. But for me, and maybe this is something that you've come across, is learning to understand the different listening styles between an introvert and an extrovert. Because and I'm very going to generalize now, is introverts listen more, extroverts talk more. And this is a generalization, and I appreciate that it can be different ways. But have you, in the course of your years of really starting to learn and work with listening, is this something you've noticed, or is it something that you haven't noticed and is not something that you've seen? So I'd just love to know if you've come across any differences between an introvert and an extrovert when it comes to listening styles, or the way they would listen, or if they listen at all.
Well, let me ask you a question. As an introvert, when someone's really listening to you and you know it, are you so introverted?
I don't think so, because I can get really absorbed into a conversation. If I feel that the person is listening to me,
Yeah.
then it's that connection. I do need that connection to carry on with the relationship or the conversation. If I don't feel that conversation, I guess I just shut down a bit and just let them, they become background noise. So but it's something that I am curious about, because is seeing if there's different styles or different ways of listening.
I'm sorry, different styles of listening in regards to introversion, extroversion?
Yeah, or just if you've noticed different ways or different styles, the way people listen, whether it's as an introvert or an extrovert, or just as individuals.
Oh my God, yeah, I feel like almost every individual has their own listening style. Um, but of course, given my field and what I do with my life, what I notice mostly is what gets in the way of people listening. So again, like you said, from a generalized perspective, it seems the same to me too. Extroverts tend to chat more, introverts tend to listen more. But even what I found is even the definition of those two things, it kind of ebbs. The boundaries get mushy because if someone's really tracking me and asking questions, I start talking. And probably like both of you, I can tell the millimeter of when they're set back a little bit, or they're in their head, or there's something, and that I could easily move more towards, okay, and more introverted, less expressive, more accepting of, okay, it's not going to go that way. So I noticed that that's what I'm hesitant to talk about people in terms of styles. What I notice is how we'll move along the spectrum of styles depending on if we're listening or if the other is really listening or not. Then our old patterns tend to take over. An extrovert, when they're not listened to, might talk faster and more. An introvert tends to be quieter and say, okay, and they'll accept this is what reality is. People don't really listen. Okay, I'll just come back home. Does that fit?
Yeah, it does. And thank you for that. It's just trying to, I don't know, just get a not so much a more of an understanding, but just seeing the differences or just acknowledging the differences in a way. And it's something that just fascinates me. This whole introversion extroversion thing really fascinates me on how people react in the world. And if we're going to talk about listening, then there's a different way, and it makes sense what you say is introverts tend to withdraw more if they're not being listened to, whereas an extrovert will most probably talk more to try and be heard more. And
Right.
it's a huge topic.
Right. And in both of those categories, I feel like both of them are aching to be heard. So even if the extrovert turns it up a notch and the introvert turns it down, it's all predicated on, are we really having this tender, subtle, intimate connection? If not, we go into our old patterns. And there's a lot of not in the listening field.
Something you mentioned is what got you started with this was feeling alone, even in a, with friends, you just felt that you weren't necessarily being heard and being alone. Is this, are you finding this happening more and more? And I know you touched on loneliness and even though we connected to the world, essentially we feel more alone. But are you finding that through the years that people are feeling like they're not being heard more and more now? Is it growing this I don't know if I'm being very succinct. I'm trying to find a way to ask or ask the question. So let me try that again. I'm going to try to put my teeth back in and see if I can get my brain and my mouth to actually communicate together. Over the years, have you noticed that people are feeling more alone because they're not being heard more, or are people able to make themselves heard better now than they could say a few years ago?
Boy, I don't know. That's a great question. My feeling is, philosophy, religions, they're predicated on aloneness. We're desperately searching for connection. So my guess, my rather uneducated guess would be the aloneness has been there from the very beginning. But like you were saying earlier about social media and such, we're becoming, especially I think the West, because I don't know much about the East, we're becoming more and more um, alone in our desperation to be heard. And so we're going about it the opposite way that I think would be beneficial. Like you said, we're talking more, we're throwing out sentences on X or Twitter or whatever, and aching for connection, but not really finding it. And if I can, this may be a little bit off topic, but I want to talk about innocence because you're reminding me of it. And it's one of the main features of the book. What I mean by innocence is I think we're all born innocent. And when we bring a need, let's say to mom, when mom shows up for that innocence, we learn we're safe in our innocence. We can bring our needs, our desires, and we're held. When mom's impatient or whatever, and she's sharp, we learn step by step what we can bring, what is safe, and what is not safe. So we learn to protect our innocence, put it in a container and push it away. And my my bias is that having to protect and put away essentially who we are. So another metaphor, innocence is like a 1-year-old baby who you feed steamed broccoli to, and they put it in their mouth and they right away they're no, 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 get that out of here. 2 minutes later, you give them some ice cream, and 1 second later, they're wearing it. They love it so much. So they know exactly what they want. They know exactly what they don't want. So if we as parents really listen, be really curious, the child learns my innocence is a good thing and I can bring it into the world. I don't have to push it. I'm welcome. There's a quiet to it. But unfortunately, parents, and I include myself in this because I've messed up many times with my boys, we don't drop in to that kind of sacred reverie of listening. If they're having a nightmare and I come in and I have to get up at 6 in the morning, I could easily say, look, there's no monster under the bed. Go to sleep. And like that, the child learns, don't bring fear to Papa. If I sit on the bed and go, what happened, sweetie? What happened? Oh, well, what'd the monster look like? Do you want to look under the bed with me? Do you want me to just... The child learns I could even bring that innocence of fear and I'm held. So when I get older, I can talk about my fear in a quiet way. It doesn't have to get pushed out because I'm convinced it won't be received. So I think all of that gets, it's part of the complex soup of listening and not really being heard. Does that make sense?
I think it makes perfect sense. And innocence also makes me think about animals and how they listen and how they are so in tune with us humans that they are absolute masters in listening, and we're often confused by their behavior. And I've been so often just annoyed and angry at my dog until I realized that the dog is just reflecting my mood, my energy, my state of mind. And she's behaving the way she's behaving because of me, because she is a master at listening. So when I'm anxious, she's more anxious. When I'm stubborn, and she's more stubborn. When I'm at ease, she's at ease. And the same with other animals on the planet. So when you're talking about innocence, one thing is, yes, how we're teaching our kids and how we're teaching young souls with how we communicate with them, but also it's how we communicate with animals, again, not just with words, with our energy, with our vibe, because then that's a beautiful mirror if we allow it to be.
Yes, I agree completely. They're going to tell us what's going on. I have a similar story. My lady Davida is a therapist, and sometimes we're talking about stuff, and she'll, just a 2% raise in voice or sadness. And our puppy, Tuccio, who's 8 years old, he never misses. He'll go right up and put his paw on her and look her in the face, start to lick her. He'll pick up, you're not feeling good, and I'm going to come soothe you. And it's crushing. It's so beautiful. So yeah, I think animals pick it up. But I'd also like to suggest we pick it up too. We're just so inured to that we're not going to be listened to. We jump off it as soon as we feel it. We do automatic pilot, we pull back, we push it, something, but we are equally as perceptive and responsive, even if we're not thinking in our mind, oh, they're talking over me, so I'm going to step back. We just step back.
And that just brings me to the idea of listening in the raw to your book.
Thank you.
And we could talk for hours, and we have talked for such a long time, and it went in a blink of an eye when you're really listening to and you have a conversation. It's incredible. So before we wrap up, I would love for you to spend a little bit of time and telling our listeners about your book. Like,
Oh,
what is it all about? Why did you wrote it? And why should anyone, go and have a look and read or listen to it?
thank you. I think what happens when we really commit to listening is we become more able to hear our own intuition, the inner voice of wisdom, if you will. And that's a blessing to me in my work, because if I'm really quiet and really listening, thoughts come up that I wouldn't have thought of from my rational brain. And then I can check it out with the person I'm speaking to, and it's right or wrong. And usually it's right. So my intuition started buzzing that I wanted to write down these thoughts. I had ideas about it and I wanted to flesh them out and really get it clear for me. And then, again, from intuition, the book kind of wrote itself. I would just sit, get quiet, and the words would start to flow out. And secondly, because when I consult with other therapists, I'm sometimes horrified by what they do, how they get in the way of their own listening. And it's sad. So I was hoping to write something that parents, therapists, partners could read, where they would become more committed to listening. It would be more attractive. Kind of like what you were saying earlier. There's so much emphasis on expression that maybe there'd be a little more emphasis on reception, really allowing yourself to be penetrated by what the person was feeling and saying. So it became a kind of a passion for me, and I know it comes right out of my own hurt about aloneness. I thought I could feel it. I can feel it in everyone I speak to. So the words just kind of flew out of me, and it came. And that's why, like you said, it's called listening in the raw, because this is not listening just in the service of others. It's listening in the service of my own growth. So I have to be raw and vulnerable to feel, step out of a role and into being.
Thank you for sharing that. And it's definitely sounds like a book worth reading and worth accessing. And this conversation talk about listening, vulnerability, and all that we've spoken about. And it's something that Lenk and myself, we could talk about this for hours, and I'm sure that we will be at some point talking more about this. And we really appreciate you sharing your knowledge, your wisdom, and your time with us today. Now, if there's listeners wanting to, they've listened and think, I need to get in contact. I want to be in Randall's circle. I'd like to connect with them. Where can people find you?
Well, I have a website, and the book is on Amazon, as well as an audiobook, which, by the way, is read by my son, Lucas. He's the Earl of Dad Jokes, and he wanted to do the audio portion, so it's all in the family. So yeah, they can go to my website and talk with me, or they can get the book and then talk to me, or they can just send good energy out into the universe.
We will put all the links, the links for your book, the links for your website, and all the links we will put in the description so that people can then connect with you, because I think it'd be wonderful to just connect and find a way, or read your book to help them to find the art of listening. And it sounds wonderful that your son is read or produced, or not produced, but is the voice of the audiobook. Yes. Wonderful. How great that is. So again, thank you so much for just sharing your time with us and your expertise and your wisdom with us today. We really appreciate. I know it's in the morning for you, it's in the evening for us, but this is wonderful about the internet or Zoom or this global community that we are part of. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
I want to thank you. I loved the questions. I loved the depth, and I loved how you really listened, and your questions were predicated on what you heard. So you feel like sisters to me already. So thank you so much. I'm so glad you're out there doing your work.
Oh, thank you. That's so wonderful that you've shared that. And for our listeners, what have you got from today? What has got your thoughts going on listening? Is listening something that you've thought about before or aware of, or is it something that you just do, as in just hearing and not necessarily listening to what the person you're talking to is sharing? Or are you somebody who really does like to listen to what others are saying? We would love to hear your thoughts or to know your thoughts on your experience of listening. Is it something that you really embrace, or is that something that you are on the journey of accomplishing, like most of us are? Listening is an art, and we are learning that art. There are some experts, but we would love to hear your thoughts. So please share with us. You can share in the comments on LinkedIn or Instagram, but do let us know what you think about listening. And until next time, we'll chat to you soon. Bye.
Bye.